This is a Step Beyond the Fire podcast. My name is Cully. I'm a land manager and a wildlife biologist here in my home state of Florida. I invite you to join me on a journey as I seek to document the little-known stories told by those who use fire for the benefit of the land, also known as prescribed fire. So come on, let's head into the field and meet the people where the flame ends and new life begins. Support for A Step Beyond the Fire podcast is due in part to the following sponsor.
Hello, this is Scott Crosby, owner of Crosby Forestry and GIS Services, LLC. My mission is to help private landowners with their forest management needs. I specialize in timber sales, reforestation, forest management plans, and exotic plant mapping. Check out my website at crosbyforestry.com to find out how my 33 years of forestry experience in Florida can help serve you and your land management needs. I will look forward to speaking with you about how to turn your land into forest and forest into cash with a stewardship ethic.
Welcome back to Season 2, Episode 1 of A Step Beyond the Fire podcast. I'm here today with a new friend of mine named Greg Seamon. Now, Greg is a highly experienced wildland fire and ecological restoration professional. So his land management and his great wildland fire background spans more than 40 years, which is incredible. It includes service as a biologist, a land steward, conservation program manager, restoration ecologist, fire training specialist. You've pretty much done it all, which is really impressive. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that too. And he's also instructed experiential training courses across the U.S. and in Belize, Mexico, and Portugal. As a burn boss, he has also supervised over 350 prescribed fires in forest and grassland ecosystems. I'm so happy you're here, Greg. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Cully. I'm pleased to be here.
You know, it's funny. So a few episodes ago, we met with Scott Sager, who I think you know at the University of Florida, and he mentioned, he's like, man, one thing about this, if you become a burn boss, you're going to have one get out at some point. It's not a matter of if, but a matter of when. And I look at 350 prescribed fires. That is just unbelievable. I thought about, if I do the math on this, if you did 20 burns a year, and then that's a very impressive number. But have you found what Scott said to be true in all of those experiences?
Yeah, a number of people that I've worked with over the years, we've come up with this short little term. There are two types of burn bosses: ones that have lost a burn and ones that will. If you do it often enough, whether you want to talk about the holes in the Swiss cheese model or just something happens and you can be as prepared as you want, and that doesn't mean it's not going to jump somewhere and move away from where you want to burn. You know, we call it good fire versus bad fire when you're doing the prescribed fire. You know, we want it inside the box, but often you may get it to move outside the box, and occasionally it moves so far out that you have to declare it.
Yeah, it's been coming from, my recent experiences working for a local municipality. It's like I've had to be hyper focused on what's happening, today, not only today for the burn, but what's happening tomorrow, what's happening the next day, and then what's happening the day after that. And so I find myself racing to try to get to like that 100% mop up phase and to be able to declare it out. Well, let me back up on that, because declaring it out is a whole nother stage, but getting to that where I'm comfortable having mopped up to the 100%. I've had a lot of learning to do on that recently, and it's been an eye-opening experience for me, because there's one thing, if you're setting a fire out, and you're 10 miles outside of town and the smoke isn't an issue. But anyway, that's just my recent, within the past couple of years, I've just been hyper-focused on that part of the burning process.
Well, you can't get away from it. The smoke is yours until there is no more smoke. And so, how long do you have smoke? I did a burn back in the early 90s that we felt pretty good with 2 days later. Weren't seeing any smoke, but it was the end of April, and we knew May was going to be dry, so we kept an eye on it. And every once in a while, I'd see just these little puffs. So I'd walk out and find that there was some little duff burning, and then I'd turn around, and every place where my foot had gone, there was now smoke coming up because I'd added oxygen into that duff. And even though it was surrounded by good burn, good sand, it wasn't going to continue to creep out of the unit. It finally went out the middle of June when we got rain. So it was about a 6-week that we were still monitoring, and it was right along a 2-lane road that was 60 miles an hour. So kept us continuing to check often every day.
So the science about duff wasn't very well, researched back then. Is that right? Or did you guys have a pretty thorough understanding of how that?
Well, we had a decent understanding of it, I think, but it was a small swale that we'd burned this unit in the past and never had any problems. And it just happened to get enough into what was left in that swale. And as it dried, it just kept working. And I was hesitant to use foam at that time. So we tried a little water. The swale was too big for the amount of water we were going to be doing. I also didn't really want to do the disturbance to the ground. We were in a big restoration phase, and I didn't want to disturb any of our native plants. But the continuing to burn in the duff took care of most of those native plants, unfortunately.
Yeah, a lot of strange twists and turns that I've found in this, when you're doing these kinds of things there's a lot of unexpected stuff. And that's kind of the point of this show, is to shed light on some of those experiences and offer them up as a learning experience from time to time too. So there's always a little bit to talk about on that front. But one of the things that I often lose track of in learning about the latest research and the latest science and things that are, on the cutting edge of fire ecology in this country, I sort of lose track of other countries across the world, or I feel like I don't look at them closely enough to see what they have going on in their programs too. And I appreciate that some of those articles that you sent to me, those were really enlightening about your experiences, like, for instance, in Australia. I thought it'd be a good time to give you the opportunity to shed a little light on some of your experiences in other countries like Australia.
Sure. I'd be pleased to. It's, as you mentioned, I've been lucky enough to work in prescribed fire across the U.S., not as much in certain areas as I'd like, but enough across the country to and then I've, through our training with the National Interagency Prescribed Fire Training Center, had met people from every state, has come through PFTC. I'm going to shorten it a little because it's too long to keep saying National Interagency Prescribed Fire Training Center. And we've also had folks from outside the U.S. come through. And that was where I first started meeting some of the people, and through an introduction with a gentleman from Western Australia who came through. We developed a relationship going back and forth with emails and some phone calls, and he invited myself and the director of the center at the time to come over for a meeting in Western Australia and to spend extra time to talking to them. They were actually thinking about starting a National Prescribed Fire Training Center in Australia, at which they have since done. And so it was just the ability to get out and meet people with the same interest, but also the same passion. Let's use good fire to hopefully eliminate some of the problems with bad fire and also benefit the ecosystem. And so spent most of my time in Western Australia, did get to spend a little bit of time in Queensland and a little bit of time just in Sydney. But Western Australia was great, got to be on a couple burns. And the best was working with a woman. We were driving through a pine area, and we were just flipping matches out the windows, both sides, to light it. Yeah, and of course she's driving, so we're staying closer to her side of the trail. We get to the end, and I can't do an Australian accent, but her words were, "Boy, you're not very good at this, are you?" And I said, let's go down the middle of the road on the next one. And we got down to the end, and I was able to smile at her and say, well, maybe I'm as good as you are now. But it was a great way to see how they were burning off similar things to what I burn in the Southeast. It was an introduced pine plantation that they were putting fire through for numerous reasons, but one was to eliminate the chance of wildfires later into the year. So,
yeah, I found that pretty interesting how there's a lot of similarities between the southeastern U.S. and that part of Western Australia that you were in. Mm-hmm. And obviously they have the fire-dependent ecosystems there, and it talked a little bit about the return interval, and they even have scrub ecosystems there too. And it sounded like there's stricter laws about removal of native vegetation or brush there. So there's that in some of the towns along the coast, right, where they had that scrub growing intermixed within the town.
Yeah, I was I wasn't sure that I would want to be living in those towns under the conditions that we saw some of the scrub coming into it. But they were working on putting fire back into what they were calling their bush, but scrub bush areas, and they had the ability to do some clearing, but there was also some areas that they weren't allowed to do any type of clearing in, and so the thoughts of the people that I spent time with was, we have to learn how to live with fire. And I think they've been doing it maybe as well in some cases than we have. And but you're always going to have those certain years where no matter what you've done, it tends to go off. And that happened a couple of years ago in Australia. So yeah, it was bad.
Were any of the people that you knew affected by those fires?
Nobody I knew of had any impact. They were working some of the fires, but they didn't have any problems with where they lived or to any of their family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a sad turn of events, and we were talking about it recently about the Canadian situation too. I mean, we have a changing world, and it was nice to see this, how, there was such good collaboration there, but you guys were also talking about how, you set up these programs for between interagency type programs. And I think, talk a little bit more about the Prescribed Fire Training Center and the work that you're doing there. For folks who may not have heard anything about that, can you give a quick spiel about that?
Sure. Well, this is our 26th year. We started our first year with students coming in was 1998. It started with 30-day training sessions. They're now, we've learned early on, and I say I wasn't here at the time. I was actually a cooperating host site, and I had modules from the sessions come and burn with me. But the 20 days, we try to get them out there they're out and with the opportunity to burn at least 15 of those days. We're averaging for each module between 9 and 10 burns during the 15 days that they're out. But it's not all just about putting fire on the ground. It's about the lessons you learn and you can take home with you about what are you thinking about. It's, for most of us that aren't in fire, you think of, well, that's the day. That's what they're doing. They're out burning. But all that work that goes into pre and then post. One of my favorite things to say is, if you're not monitoring, it's just arson, because you can't prove that why you burned. We're burning for objectives, but if you're not monitoring, so we focus a lot on ecological objectives and monitoring for that pre and post, and then all that comes into, it's not just writing the plan, it's talking to your neighbors, talking to your cooperators who you may have to rely on and help. And I'm hoping that the people who come through our sessions go home with a better idea of all the things and how to maybe address some of those challenges back where they are. And then we also do a agency administrator workshop, which is focused on those people who are responsible for fire on their units, but are not the fire people, the district rangers, the forest supervisor, the park superintendent, the refuge manager, who has to give a go, no-go on whether they want to delegate that fire authority to someone on their station to do the burn. And I think those workshops have become really high intensity for the cadre and for the students. But I think people walk away with at least the students coming through walk away with a better understanding of where's their lane, what's their role in supporting a prescribed fire program for the unit that they're on, and how to ask those questions about it to feel comfortable, and how to develop that relationship with their fire staff, particularly if they're not coming from any fire background. So
yeah, that's a tough gap to fill, because the tendency is to think, oh, well, this guy's up in the office here, he didn't know what we're dealing with out here. So
exactly,
I've heard a lot of that over the years, just how that can be. So bridging that gap, I'd be interested to hear more on that one sometime.
Yeah, well, we put them through 2 burns in the 6 days they're with us. So one day is stations and they get to carry a drip torch, and the second burn, they have to organize themselves. We don't let them just go do it. We've got a lot of qualified people to work with them, but we let them understand the pressure that they're asking their people to do. What's it feel like? And so those have all been good experiences. I haven't had anybody say, boy, I wish we hadn't done this. Through our 20 days, we've had students from 17 countries outside the U.S., and that runs from Africa to Central America to South America to Australia to Canada and Europe. So it's been really a good experience, because they bring in experiences that we don't have. Lots of times they have a different way of looking at it. A few years ago, we had a separate week-long workshop with 12 people from Brazil, and talking to them about what they could and couldn't do with fire, and then how they do it. And then I happened to, just luckily this year in Portugal, I got to run into one of the people who'd come through that on those 6-day tour with us, and he showed what they were still what they'd taken from what we talked about, but what they were doing. And the video of the guy using a lit bow and arrow to light across a ravine to get another side to burn. and then watching the fire burn. It worked. So
did you teach them that one?
Oh, no, that one I didn't teach them. That one they knew already. But how they were thinking about how to prepare for that, and that they had already burned what was upslope from it so that it was going to burn into black, which they might not have done. But we talked about creating catcher's mitts for your next burn. Mm-hmm. How do you do that? And so wonderful time
that's fantastic.
with them.
So how was your experience working with folks outside of the U.S.? How has that changed you?
That's it's you go into it with the idea of what you know and how you're going to tell somebody else about your knowledge and experience. I mean, we all have that. I want to pass on what I know. And I think that some of the things I learned were many of the challenges are the same. You know, it's the public, it's the what are we doing with our smoke? Some places they don't have it. That a couple of the guys from Brazil said, "Oh yeah, we'll burn 4,000 acres in a day with 3 of us because it's going to go out at night because the humidity gets so high." And he said, "And our smoke, we've got hectares and hectares and hectares with nothing around us, so we don't have to worry about what our smoke's doing." You know, I went, okay. I'd like to come visit.
Do they have an actual fire boundary line somewhere, or was it just?
It's usually a difference in vegetation types. No, they're not creating hard line in their area. And then you go to and talk to people from Germany who still don't have the ability to use prescribed fire. It's not legal, but so they never used to have wildfires. Over the last decade or so, they're starting to see more, and they're trying to figure out how to do it. And in many cases, they're doing it with volunteer fire departments in full bunker gear. And if you've been on fires, you know, running around in full bunker gear trying to look at wildland fire would be difficult. So they're starting to look at other ways of doing it. Wales, which you think of, and Ireland being really wet, and they've got vegetation that they can burn, and theirs is working with the public to understand good fire versus bad fire. Bad fire is when people have dumped out their grilling stuff on a weekend after being out in the woods, and it burns wherever it wants. And good fire is burning some of these areas where they know they've got heavy vegetation up against housing units. So how do they do that? And the public sees fire as it's all bad. So I think the things that I've gotten from coming away is, fire is a unifying entity for those of us interested in it. It doesn't matter why you do it versus the person next to you doing it. There's no right or wrong in that. We need to maintain the ability to use it and use it wisely. And so, as I said, the people in Brazil talk about setting them with flaming arrows, and then some folks in Germany using these remote controlled machines to clear fire line that look like just this really small tank because they've got so much UXO from World War II and World War I still, plus when they were split, East Germany versus West Germany. So they said, we'll get a big boom and we'll have to, drag it back. It's on a winch that they can then pull back, and they do some work on it and send it back out and let it start clearing line again.
Wow, that's something I hadn't even considered, is that they've got a hell of a lot of that stuff to deal with in their day-to-day. And not only that, they're trying to improve their understanding of how to actually do a prescribed fire. So that's
right.
Man.
Yeah. And then, we have this, I think everybody understands what prescribed fire is, but I love that Australia, and I came back with this, and I try to talk to they call it planned burning. And I think everybody can understand we're burning and there's a plan for it. Sometimes you get people, you talk to them about prescribed burning and they go straight to, oh, you mean controlled burning. And I don't want to use that term. So I like planned burning.
I do too. That's a good, it puts people, doesn't put them on the offensive.
Exactly.
Is a good way of, saying that. I thought that reminds me of, speaking of breaking down boundaries, I liked in that article when you brought everybody to the table. So we were down in Australia. One of the things I would have never have thought of is, you got all these agency personnel and everybody's got their titles and their, and their uniforms, and everybody's divided up based on that. And to send a subtle message to the group about, okay, we're all together in this. The request was to wear business casual. Mm-hmm. Everybody wear business casual. And so that put everybody not necessarily like on the offensive. It kind of like had everybody take a little bit of a step back subconsciously to say, all right, we're here and we're all at the same table and we all have this common goal that we want to achieve here. So let's get to work.
I found that it works best. I wish I could claim that. But we have adopted that with all of the trainings that I've been involved with, because often you'll have somebody there and their boss is also there. And they tend to not say anything because their boss is there, but everybody knows that's their boss because of the uniform they're wearing. And by putting them all in non, and as you said, business casual, and then making sure that they're not in the same group with their boss.
Yeah.
We'll get a lot more input from people. And often, that group will be sitting together at the beginning because the boss is here. We're all going to sit with the boss and support whatever that person says. And instead, we divide them up. And then when they get back together, you see a much better sharing of information because that boss could only be in one group. And there's maybe 5 or 6 other groups going on. So how's that person going to get what information's being talked about? So I think it adds to helping them communicate, at least at this time, without that feeling of I've got to toe a particular line here. You're not. You're moving with what's the group talking about, and what do I have to add into that?
That's brilliant. I really like that. So the PFTC has really helped you guys overcome a lot of great challenges, both now and you're addressing these things that are coming up in the future. Is there anything, as far as overcoming goes, are there any major challenges that you foresee coming up in the future besides what we've kind of talked about today?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones, and it's not just the PFTC in training, it's going to be to prescribe fire, is what's going to happen with the EPA's rule on PM 2.5. They're talking about lowering it. And if it lowers, how does prescribed fire fit in that? And air quality is going to be our biggest concern. Yeah, you have to think about safety of neighboring properties and all that, but I think air quality, if you ask anybody who's out there, smoke is our biggest problem. Well, what happens with that air quality? Those fine particles that are a detriment to people's ability to breathe. Can we show that prescribed fire puts up less than wildfires? I think we can. We've got that data starting back even in the 80s. They were starting to follow that, but many people consider that that's an act of nature, whether it's actually an act of nature or not. Here we're actually choosing the day. We have to be careful about thinking what day and where is our smoke going to go, and how much are we going to put up and how long will it be? And so I think that's going to be one of our biggest challenges going forward. And we're working with folks at Tall Timbers to look at some remote sensing data. It's not just at Tall Timbers; it's happening all over the world. And there's some group looking at particulate matter out of prescribed fires versus wildfires, and where do we go with that? But those are some concerns I've got, and I'm hoping that with the way certain things have changed, and that we're still going to be building our capacity, and if we're going to increase fuel treatments, we're going to have to build a greater capacity. And I'm close to the end of my career. A number of my mentors have already reached the end of their career. Not all of them. Some of them are younger than I am, and I still consider them mentors. But we're moving on. I'm hoping that we're instilling in those who are following behind us to do even bigger and better things. And I see that with the people who are coming through the Prescribed Fire Training Center.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I guess the tendency is for me to think about the United States as being a leader in how we use fire as a tool and teaching, but would you consider us a leader, or would you consider us more of, are we way behind, or are we right up there with other countries, or where do you see us in the midst of all these important things that are going on?
I've thought a lot about this, and I'm not sure it's a fair question, because we've all come from different areas and different abilities. I think that we're very good with the information tools and dealing with the political and social climate that we have here, and it works for us. And we're going to have to continue to move forward in certain areas of the country versus others where it's a little more difficult. And in that, we may be ahead of some countries. We may be behind some countries in that. I think there are some that are working on tools that we haven't thought of yet. But I think what's so great about the internet and the ability to share information is I know that some of the folks in Europe have tied in with some of the researchers in the U.S. and they're sharing information and figuring out how to do things based on some of the things we've done. And I know some of the things they've done are starting to transfer to over here. So I think that we just have to realize that using fire, you use it to meet an objective. And as long as we're all doing that, it doesn't matter what our objectives are, as long as that objective meets either our agency responsibility or the need of the piece of property we manage, that's okay. And I think everybody's trying to find a way to do that within the social and political context of where they work. And I would hate to say that we're ahead or behind. I think we're doing what will work in the U.S. Some of our things will work for others. We can pick up some of the things they do in other countries. But
it's a great point. That's a really great point. Well, that's I'm really impressed by all the great work that you've done and your impact on others' lives as we develop and further our knowledge of fire and how we use it in different landscapes. And I really appreciate you getting together with us today. This has been a truly enlightening conversation. And I'll actually, if that's okay with you, I'll probably look at posting some of those articles or some of the travels that you've had. So, and I think folks will really enjoy that. And With all that being said, is there any one final message that you'd like to leave us with before we sign off?
Well, I'm known for leaving what I call bumper sticker thoughts,
Right.
and I've stolen a few of them from others. I'm not going to give them credit right now. A person I work with here talks about people will say you need to step outside your box, and he believes people are too uncomfortable doing that. He says we don't need to step outside our box, we just need to make our box bigger to give us the ability to do what we want to do. And I like that.
That's great.
I think as a mentor of mine once said, you burn to meet objectives. If all you want to do is make the land black, he can tie fusees to donkey's tails. But is that actually getting you what you want? I've already told you the one I really like. If you're not monitoring what you've done, it's just arson. One that, and I've got just three more. I promise not to leave you with too many.
Great. I'm loving it.
People will tell you you have to be flexible. And I think in prescribed fire, well, in any fire environment, whether it's wildfire suppression or prescribed fire, flexibility is too rigid. It really means you only bend so far to be flexible. And I think you've got to be fluid. You have to be able to just move where you need to be to address what's going on at that point.
Like it.
And then one that if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. It takes a positive attitude to make a difference.
Man, that's a good one.
And then the one I got from Ralph Nader that I have on my email, it just says, I start with the premise that the function of leadership is to produce more leaders, not more followers. And I think that's what the Prescribed Fire Training Center is doing.
Far out.
And I hope that's what I've done with my career, is to produce more leaders and not more followers.
Well, we certainly appreciate you, Greg, for your time. And we are always thankful that folks that come on this show take us with them in another step beyond the fire. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Cully. I appreciate it.